Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprint so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it, at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Brooke Siem, author, chef, and advocate for safe antidepressant withdrawal. In her memoir, May Cause Side Effects, Brooke shares her personal journey through antidepressant withdrawal and the lessons she learned along the way. Brooke, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
I'm excited to have you here today. You're somebody after my own heart. I don't think a lot of people know this about me, but I was a chef for about a little over a decade, did high-end catering, weddings and events in Chicago. Pretty much whatever in magazines, we tried to replicate that and make it happen for all the brides that were out there trying to have their perfect wedding. And we did the best that we could to make that happen for them. But it's also interesting to look at your social media and see that you're also an author and a painter and a gymnast. And I have being a gymnast in my background as well. So it's cool to see you, to dive into all of these things, and you're just not afraid to get into it. It seems like you look at something and you're like, I'm going to do that. And then you manifest it, you make it happen. So tell everybody who you are and who you help.
I actually think it's maybe a bit of the other direction. I don't see something and say, I'm going to do that. It's something's put in front of me, and I say, I guess I'm going to do that. So I don't have a choice.
So what makes you think that you don't have a choice?
Because when the universe puts something or someone in front of me, it's just so obvious, and it's just like an itch that if I don't scratch it, it's just going to get worse and worse until it takes over. And it just feels like this is what you do now.
No, it's so interesting because you recognize what's in front of you when you I don't think a lot of people have that level of self-awareness, or we have so much fear and trepidation around that thing that we might want it. It might be a burning desire. Oh man, I wish I could go do that one thing. But to be able to recognize that in the moment and then say, okay, I'm here for this, and you're open to it, that's really great. So what gives you the confidence to be able to recognize those things in the moment and then move forward on it?
There was a lot of practice involved, but I do think there's probably an angle of this that does come back to working in kitchens. So I have two lives right now. I'm a private chef to pro athletes, and I've been working in some variation of the food industry as a chef/cook for 15, 17 years. I don't know, losing math on that one. Yeah. And then I also do a whole lot of work in the world of psychiatric drug withdrawal because I was put on a cocktail of psych drugs when I was a kid. And then I was pulled off of them recklessly when I was 30. And that completely blew my life apart. So if you think of it from the perspective of, okay, I spent basically ages 22 to 30 I was in high-end kitchens in New York. I also did high-end catering in New York. And then I owned my own bakery in New York. And so my worldview was really built on kitchen structure, which is you work really hard, you're in there at weird hours, and so it's predictable in the sense that you go to the same place every day. And very often you're just repeating the same dish 200 times in one day or whatever it is. But there's also an element of every day being completely different. And someone comes in and they have a major allergy, or someone calls out, or the fish doesn't show up and you have to pivot. So there's a lot of flexibility and paying a lot of attention and having to make a new decision and pivot real quick. But it's the kind of thing that nobody would really notice unless you're in it. Like, it all happens in a matter of minutes. And I think it really just teaches you to pay attention. And even from the standpoint of cooking itself, it's not just something you do with your hands. It's not about you over a cutting board with a knife or a spoon on the stove. You're listening to what the food sounds like. You're smelling it. You know when it's done before the timer goes off because your spidey senses tickled you and said, nope, we need to take it out a minute before it goes off. Otherwise, it's going to overcook. And that's going to change based on the kitchen or the oven, right? And so you're very full body attuned. Now, I was also very much a full-bodied realist at that point in my life. I'd been on these drugs for so long. I had really built this identity around having a chemical imbalance, and I thought I was depressed. There was nothing I could do about it. I was going to need these drugs for the rest of my life. Otherwise, I'd kill myself if I wasn't on them. This was very much the paradigm for which I worked through. So it was very logical in a way, very black and white, very if then then that. But then when I got pulled off of them, and I was plunged into this severe withdrawal, all of a sudden I was forced to really reconcile with a more spiritual existence. And I say that because it's not like I saw Jesus. I haven't spent a lot of time in churches, but withdrawal is a process that is so stripping. It strips everything you thought you knew about yourself. And there's no going back. And there gets to be a point, at least if it's severe, where I saw this in myself and I see it with a lot of people. You get to a point where logic and the way the world works doesn't really do enough to explain your situation. So you're forced to go into the world of the spiritual and to find meaning in something that has no explanation. And when I combined that basically crash course in spirituality with the fact that I had spent so much of my career being really in it when it came to listening and smelling and touching and feeling, those two things came together. And now it's been 9 years since I've been in withdrawal, and I still work as a chef, but in a different capacity. That feeling of knowing when the cookies are done before the timer goes off happens all around in my life. It's somebody walks in, and now I just know what it feels like when someone walks in and I'm like, oh, there you are. I don't know what you're doing here. Like, why are you here? I don't know. But I know it's you. I know it's not an accident that it's you. And I know we have something to do together. And I don't know how long that's going to last. And so that over and over again, whether or not that's career or personal experience, that happens to me now.
That last portion, I think, is really beautiful in that we don't know how long that's going to last. We do have these opportunities for collaboration. You often hear me say that we're always in a state of becoming, and we're always co-creating with the people that are around us or that we interact with in our life. We have a sphere of influence of about 15 feet on a daily basis that we operate with. Think of the Sims and the little circle around the guy, and you're
The
walking
diamond on
around.
your head.
You're walking around and you see this person, you see that person, and you interact with them and you have these conversations. If you're willing to be intentional with the types of conversations that you're willing to have or the interactions, and you can begin to tap into your empathy and see other people around you as going through life that is equally as complicated as your life, and you do that with a little bit of curiosity, you really begin to have this really full and robust life that you couldn't have had prior because you didn't have the tools or the skills or the ability or the desire or even just the know-how to tap into that level of empathy to have those types of collaborations. So to think that, yes, this is a limited experience that we're going to have potentially with this person, or it could be much longer in terms of our collaboration, it's a really beautiful thing to say.
Yeah, I think that curiosity piece gets missed so often.
Yeah.
Really, all of therapy of any kind, I think, effectively boils down to follow the curiosity. And people, I don't really think we know what that feels like after we leave childhood, because curiosity can come with trepidation. It can come with fear, but it's really just that kind of itch that you can't shake, right? You have
Right.
to lean into that and get curious about it. But we've just become so astute at absolutely beating the curiosity out of people.
That, and we've stolen the resilience away from our children.
That you need to pursue curiosity.
Correct. And it's so interesting. Now, your story starts in childhood. And I was hoping you could go back to the time where obviously you've written the book May Cause Side Effects, and you delve into your extensive experience with antidepressant withdrawal. But I think people are going to be curious to know what your journey has really looked like from the beginning with all of that.
My father died suddenly when I was 15, and it was 2001. And my mom, we were a small family. It was only the three of us. And so when my dad passed away, it was suddenly just the two of us. And my mom and I have had so many conversations about this, but she just said she didn't have the person to bounce anything off of anymore. And she noticed some behaviors in me, and she noticed that I was struggling, but it wasn't really in the way that people thought it would be. I was very stoic. I was a serious ballet dancer, and so I was taught to smile through the pain regardless of whether or not your point shoes are filling up with blood. So I was able to really put on, it's no wonder why I got into kitchen work, Jason, after that.
No, it makes sense.
It makes sense, yeah. Just jump from masochistic career to the next one.
Yeah. There's a whole case study that should be done on kitchen work and the people that work within the kitchen, because
I agree.
we're a unique breed.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. And there's part of me that just still loves it. And
You thrive on chaos.
you thrive on making order out of chaos and pain, and
You transmute all of that, and then you create something beautiful in the process.
yeah, and then you give it away.
Yes. And hopefully they like it.
And then you get a shitty review on Yelp.
Yeah,
It's
then you get a
super fun.
rejection and you're like, "Ugh."
Anyway, so I was pretty stoic and I shut down and I honestly, I didn't think anything was really wrong. I knew what I was doing and but I also wasn't really open. Like I wasn't particularly interested in talking to anybody about it. I just kind of wanted to be left alone. And so I was taken to a child psychologist at the recommendation of some family friends. I hated that woman from day one, but I kept getting dragged there. And I wasn't talking to my mom about it. I was so angry with her that I couldn't even speak to her about how angry I was that she had taken me to this woman. And after some period of time, I can't remember, my mom got a phone call that from this psychologist that effectively said, "You're wasting your time. What Brooke needs is a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. I'm diagnosing a depressive and anxiety disorder and recommending medication." And when my mom asked for more information, the psychologist cited HIPAA, saying that she couldn't share what was going on in our sessions. And what was my mom supposed to do? She just
Yeah.
followed directions. We were still very much in a world where we believed everything doctors said and thought they had all the answers. And so I got taken to a child psychiatrist and then I was put on a cocktail of drugs. And I didn't fight it because I was still in the again, when it's described to you as like taking Advil for a headache or whatever, you're just like nobody tells you what the consequences of these things are, and it's a 15-minute appointment and it's
Yeah,
complete
where's the
racket.
real informed consent on that?
Oh, none. I signed a paper protecting the doctor. That's informed consent
Yeah.
in our system. But
And
I
then
was
you
put
get that 20-mile long pamphlet that goes along with everything with and
but
all
you
small
ignore
letter
it
print. Yeah.
because they say it's rare, but
Right.
it just continues the malarkey. And then I pretty quickly aged out of the system in the sense that I turned 18 and I was in charge of my own medical decisions, but I'd been drugged for a couple years at that point, and at the time when my personality was developing, I was going through puberty, so any changes that were happening within me, it was very easy to write it off as puberty, growing up, being a hormonal teenager. So I didn't have any sense that the person I was growing into was actually being affected by these drugs in any way. And I got very sarcastic and snarky, and I didn't care about anything. And that was so easy to just write off as being a bitchy, moody teenager. But in retrospect, that stuck. Like that stayed with me for the next 15 years. But that wasn't who I was as a kid. I've always had a little bit of darkness and I'm certainly intense, but I was interested in things. I had a huge creative mind. I loved building things. I was taking advanced math courses. I won a math award. And so it seemed like maybe my path was more along the lines of something like an MIT or engineering, especially in the early 2000s. Then my dad died. I get drugged. And all of a sudden, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to learn anything. I applied to one school because I didn't care. I got in. I couldn't pick a major. I declared a major last minute. I ended up with a generic history degree from a very expensive bougie liberal arts school in New England, and then I went into work in kitchens for $7 an hour. This didn't make any sense.
Nice.
But it just I didn't have any ambition. I didn't care if I was alive, so I didn't act like there was any consequences. I didn't care about saving for the future. I didn't want a family. I didn't want any of that stuff because I just wanted to cease to exist. And I had no idea that the drugs were contributing to that mentality. And I couldn't know until I went through the withdrawal experience that I did and started to see glimpses of life and ambition and hope and curiosity. And I was like, "Oh, holy shit. This was a side effect. This was never me. Nobody ever told me that this was a possibility. Nobody ever recognized it. If you talked about any of this, they would just say, 'Oh, your depression is coming back. We're going to up your dose.'" Like, it's astounding.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And again, none of this is medical advice, guys. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. But when we look at our kids and just over the past decade or more with being drugged and the reason why they're being drugged, it's so interesting to me because we look at these things as for me, I look at it and I see there's low hanging fruit. What's your diet? Are you exercising? What is their life like? How often are they watching TV? Do they spend all day inside? Are they getting outside for play? What is home life like? What's going on there? Are there two parents? And if there's only one parent, then, how are things going? And is there a good support system within that container? Are these the questions that are really being asked? And are we willing to start moving forward? I'm curious what direction you were given in the very beginning. Did they touch on those things when you first went to the therapist?
Jason, what you're describing is a life situation that is completely in control of the parents. And yet we medicate the child and say it's the child's problem. So let's get honest about why we're medicating kids. We're medicating kids to make adult lives more easy.
And that's how it seems. And I look at this from a police perspective as well, and the experiences that I had on the job and how we would interact with different families and different communities. There's a lot of challenges in
Mhm.
all of those circumstances. And so I'm not denying that there aren't these great, significant challenges that are happening. At the same time, that's not the child's fault.
Yeah.
So when we look at things like little Timmy's acting out, okay,
Why?
what's the root of that? What's
Yeah.
happening within that family of origin that's causing little Timmy to act out in the way that he is, especially because he's 5
Yeah.
or he's 7 or
True.
he's 9? It's very young when we look at all of these and then we label them, you have ADHD.
Hmm.
Okay, maybe. I don't know. But I think there's that low hanging fruit that you really have to focus on that for a long period of time. Go 365 days, get that kid on a good diet, get them out exercising, get them
Yeah.
reading books and less
Get the
TV.
parents some help.
That's often another issue, right? Parental resources and support systems.
Yeah.
So
No,
what
no,
did your experience look like?
my experience, I don't deny that there aren't extremely difficult situations out there, but we also have to look at what's really happening, right? This is a bell curve. So we've got people on one end whose life situation is easy, supportive. If the child has a problem, if the parent has a problem, they have the resources to handle it where medication never gets involved. We have the other end of the curve where perhaps these drugs have a place in serious but rare
Right.
cases. The problem is the middle of the bell curve, where we have taken the strategy we are applying for serious and rare cases and pretty much applied it to everyone in the middle of the bell curve, with the exception of the handful of people on the other side who choose not to take this direction. Like, it makes no sense to me that a kid who, let's say that they are adopted in foster care in completely unstable environments, is on the exact same set of drugs as a kid with a stable home, two parents, and plenty of financial support. Like, just doesn't make sense. And there's no evidence to support any of the biological claims behind this either. So these drugs affect people. That's it. And especially the ADHD drugs. People feel good on
That
that.
is the thing, right? People say they feel good. I feel better. I feel like I can focus. I feel everything is coming together for me when I'm on the medication. I think there's probably a lot of merit to that. At the same time, all my therapist friends tell me I have ADHD, and at 46, I'm probably not going to do any type of medication.
Yeah.
That's just not for me. But I've got systems in place, knowing how I operate in the world, that I've had to learn through a lot of struggle and pain and agony and defeat and frustration,
Right.
irritation, sadness, loneliness, depression.
Mhm.
And with all of that was this resilience that came along with that. I call it
Mhm.
chronic resilience because it's always a state of building and rebuilding and pivots. Every day there's some sort of pivot or situation that I'm in that I have to take this next step, this next thought, this next issue, this next problem. You're constantly moving in all of these different directions, but you're making these conscious choices for yourself. For me, I look at it like, yeah, I feel stronger for
Mhm.
the position that I'm in right now.
And that's where true informed consent comes in.
Yeah.
So you asked about my experience, and what I was told from an informed consent standpoint was that these drugs were safe. Honestly, I don't even remember, but here's what was actually happening, right? I was on XR and Wellbutrin XL. Those are two drugs that were not approved for use in children and teens at the time in 2001 and still aren't today. Nobody told me that. Nobody told me that there was zero studies on how these drugs affect developing brains and bodies. None. Nobody told me about PSSD, which is post SSRI sexual dysfunction. Nobody asked, maybe we shouldn't be risking PSSD in a body that hasn't even hit puberty. How is that going to affect both sexual development, health, and reproductive ability. Nobody talked about the effects that these drugs have on the whole body, that they're not just blunting emotion, they are blunting the entire life experience. Nobody talked about withdrawal. Nobody talked about that 9 years later, I'm still trying to fix what happened to me during, like, physiologically, trying to fix what happened, right? The whole thing is just, oh my God, we're terrified you're going to kill yourself. So you have a bunch of drugs and we're never going to see you again. And we jump to that place so quickly, but I was not in active crisis. I was maybe on a descent that wasn't particularly successful, but I was still getting decent grades. I was still in honors and AP classes. I wasn't having sex behind a dumpster and I wasn't shooting up heroin. It was just this fear of what could happen if we didn't do something, and the fact that my mother felt like she didn't know what to do and that she needed to do something to intervene. But now when we go back and we look at it, we say, all right, what if we had taken a different approach here? Was it really that necessary that we didn't stop anything about my life and we just kept going like nothing happened? Maybe I should have taken a year off of school. Or if I didn't take a year off of high school, maybe I should have taken a gap year after high school before college. What if we'd just even taken a semester off? What if my mom and I had just been able to go somewhere and be somewhere else for a month? What if we de-emphasized the importance of academic success and said, okay, we're just going to be here and feel this? What if I had just been allowed to feel it? What if I had been taken to, I don't even know. But it's just, the bottom line is there was like, oh my God, bad feelings, fear, let's medicate it. And I don't have a crystal ball that could tell me what my life would have been like without these drugs. And there's a possibility that maybe it could have been worse. Maybe I would have descended into a full-blown eating disorder that would have killed me. But that wasn't the situation we were dealing with at the time, and yet we treated it like it was just this utmost huge crisis. And I see that all the time. I've got an example of a friend in my life right now who has 2 kids, both of whom are on ADHD drugs. The older girl is on, she's maybe 13. And I asked him, I was like, why is she on this? And he goes, oh, she needs to pay attention and stuff. And he kept saying that what we're hoping is that the skills she's going to learn while she's on the ADHD drug will translate and then we can pull her off of it. But that was right after he just finished telling me that when she doesn't take the drug, she's scattered and bouncing all over the place and doesn't seem to be applying any of the skills that she's learning when she's not medicated. And there's also, I was concerned because it seems like sometimes she's taking it and sometimes she's not, but that's neither here nor there. But the bottom line is, it's just like, you don't fully learn or absorb information when you're on these drugs, and that's part of the informed consent thing too. And I just think we're just hampering people. We're not helping them learn or grow. And yes, it's difficult. It's a hard conversation. Nobody likes to talk about it, and people get mad at me a lot. But usually what happens is these drugs work until they don't, and then people are left without any skills to cope or deal with the situation when they stop working.
When was that moment for you when it stopped working?
Oh gosh. It didn't dawn on me that I shouldn't be this depressed if my antidepressants were working until I was 30. But the reality of the situation is they probably stopped working, if they ever worked at all, which is debatable, in my early 20s. I just thought, because I was always severely depressed even while still on them, but I just had the story in my head that if I'm this depressed on antidepressants, what will I be like without them? Never dawned on me that the drugs were actually contributing to the depression.
And what are your thoughts on chemical imbalance?
Oh, I think it's generally bullshit. Can you tell me what a chemically balanced brain looks like?
That is the question, isn't it?
Mhm. And no doctor can tell you either. The chemical imbalance theory has been derived from a variety of sources, and but the main one that's been perpetuated is if these drugs, because these drugs aren't synthetic versions of serotonin or dopamine. They are molecules that fit into the receptors. And so what happens is when you flood the system with molecules that fit into the receptors, the natural serotonin, dopamine, whatever's floating around in your brain, the drug you're taking it for, is going to rise. Those levels are going to rise because they don't have anywhere to go anymore. Okay, so that's why they increase serotonin. It's not that they add more serotonin to your system. They just fill up the receptor that normally sucks up the serotonin and puts it out through your body. But the thing is that the brain will eventually readjust. So if all the receptors are bound up, then the body's, oh, we don't need this much serotonin anymore, or whatever it is. So it downregulates production and you come back into a place of homeostasis. So there's been this kind of like weird thing where because these drugs can have an effect on mood in some people, it's, oh, it must be because we increase serotonin temporarily. So therefore depression is caused by a lack of serotonin. But that's not what the literature shows. It doesn't reflect that. It's very, there's multiple different theories. You get some studies that say we've taken the serotonin levels out of spinal fluid in some people, and just because they have low serotonin, there's no depression. Then other people have high serotonin and there's tons of depression. Like, it's just very inconsistent. And then the big meta-analysis that happened about I think it was early 2024 or 2023, I can't remember, looked at all of this. This was Moncrief. It was published in Nature. It's basically, yeah, we looked at all the studies on this and we can pretty surely say that the chemical imbalance theory is not substantiated. And people in psychiatry have been saying that since the 60s, but it's been usurped by media, culture, and pharmaceutical company advertising.
Yeah,
Now,
it's certainly become a useful statement.
and it's a useful statement. And the thing is, people will say to me, okay, I don't care if the chemical imbalance theory is real or not, the drugs work for me. That's a completely different argument. And it's a completely different scenario. And whether or not we want to look into the placebo effect or
Well,
not,
that was my next question.
we can look into that if we want. And there's evidence to suggest that antidepressants, there's just a huge placebo effect happening. But the thing is, it's okay, that doesn't mean that someone doesn't become physiologically dependent on the drug if a placebo effect is involved. And that can be the tricky part with that. There's two sides to the story, and especially people who are very pro-drug really tend to miss the fact that there's two different conversations here happening at the same time. The reasons why we put people on drugs and why we stay on drugs are very different than the reasons why we come off of them and the strategies we need to use to come off of them and what happens to people when we come off of them. It is not the same thing. And yet people get so defensive about their choice to go on them or it's saving their lives or whatever that they completely forget that part two is still a thing and that not everyone can stay on these drugs long term. Sometimes you have to come off of them. Sometimes there's a shortage, there's a recall, there's another drug interaction because you get sick. Maybe you get in a car accident, you're unconscious, you don't remember to take your Effexor because you're unconscious. And then you get hit with this huge withdrawal problem that nobody knows how to recognize or deal with. Meanwhile, everyone's just, but they said drugs saved my life. And it's like, this isn't the same problem.
Yeah.
But we also need to be talking about withdrawal and the off-ramp for people when we put them on these drugs, because that should be a consideration. It's a bookend, right? Because I know for sure that if I knew how much withdrawal was going to change my life and how horrific it was going to be, I would not have stayed on these drugs for 15 years. Maybe for a short period of time, we would have made that choice. But it would not have just been this mindless thing I did for the rest of my life because I was completely under the impression that this was going to be as easy to stop as taking an Advil and not taking an Advil the next day.
That is how it often seems when you start taking any type of medication. I'll just take it for a little bit just to get through whatever this challenging time is for me. It's going to be lifelong. It's not going to be 10 years. It's not going to be 20 years. I'm not going to be on medication forever. It's to get through a particular moment in time where we're having this high level of difficulty that maybe we lack the physical, mental, and emotional skill sets to be able to navigate, or we haven't cultivated the resilience to navigate this difficult situation. Why did you make the decision to come off of your medications? And then what were some of those withdrawal symptoms that you experienced?
I made the choice to come off of them because it was twofold. The first thing is I had that realization where I was like, I shouldn't be this depressed if the antidepressants were working. Because at that point, I wasn't suicidal in the way that I was in crisis. Like, it wasn't like the police had to barge in and save me from myself. But I was thinking about it a lot, and it didn't scare me in any way. It was just this very calm, insidious thought, and I was constantly thinking about ways to die and how I would do it, and inching closer to a point where that seemed like really the reasonable choice to make. But it felt like welcome. It didn't scare me. Like, I never thought to call the crisis hotline or the suicide hotline. And I think that quiet nature of it, it's not like I was creating a big scene around it, so nobody really knew what was going on. But it did just dawn on me that I had shifted from a place of, hey, I'm just depressed and this is the way it is, to I actively do not want to be on this planet. and that the antidepressants, that was the whole point of them. So what was this paradox? So I thought about that and I just sat on it. And then I got this opportunity to travel around the world for a year, and I suddenly had a logistical problem because I was on 6 different drugs at that point, 2 antidepressants and 4 drugs to manage the side effects of the antidepressants. I didn't know that they were connected at the time because, again, no doctor had ever said, oh, maybe the thyroid function is connected to these drugs that disrupt your entire system. Nobody ever said that. So I just thought I literally had 4 diseases. Like, what?
It's wild.
Yeah. And so I just did the math on the amount of drugs I would have to take with me. And I just said, this isn't going to fly. I can't take a suitcase literally filled with these drugs. I'm not going to be in locations where we can rely on refills. And I got to do something about this. And so I just thought at the time that, okay, if I can these antidepressants clearly aren't working. So there must have been some major scientific advance in antidepressants in the past 15 years. Let me just go get the new one and I can at least cut one down there. And that's when I saw my psychiatrist, and she told me to stop taking my Effexor XR because I was on 37.5 milligrams and that was the lowest dose on the market. So she can't give you a lower dose. So just stop taking it. Good luck, basically. That's when the withdrawal hit quick. And it was a series of destabilized my entire life. It was emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual. I knew how much these drugs had affected me in one of my earliest symptoms. So Effexor has a very short half-life, which means it leaves your bloodstream, it leaves your body quickly. Now, that doesn't necessarily reflect how the brain continues or how the drug continues to affect your brain long term. But as far as just the half-life of the drug, it comes out quickly, and those typically tend to create more intense withdrawal symptoms. So for me, it was literally like 1 minute I was walking on the street. This was about 6 days after I had stopped taking the Effexor. I had been feeling flu-y and like gross and antsy in the first 6 days. But I was walking on the streets of New York, and literally from 1 minute to the next, everything changed. All of a sudden, my eyesight got better. Everything went from being slightly fuzzy to really sharp. My hearing it's like someone turned the volume up on the whole world. My skin started aching, and it was raining, and every time a raindrop hit my skin, it was like a bullet was hitting my skin. It was unbelievable how much it hurt to be there in the rain. And it happened so quickly all at once, and I just said, oh my God, like, I realized how my whole life had been deeply affected by these drugs in a way I did not understand if it even was affecting my vision. Because that was not something that really anyone said would happen. But I realized, oh my God, my entire perception of the world has been through a foggy lens. And it was cool, but it was also scary. And the psychological symptoms hadn't really hit me yet. So I was just, it was a little bit like being on mushrooms or something where you're just kind of like, this is cool.
It's like everything's vivid again. Look at all the colors.
Literally, the saturation increased. And it was, oh my God. But pretty soon after that is when the psychological symptoms hit, and there was nothing positive or fun about that. Was just constant, violent, intrusive thoughts, huge emotional swings ranging from just extreme rage to despair. There was a bout of paranoia in there. It was just, and it would come and go without any sort of pattern at all. So you could be feeling like, okay, and then all of a sudden it would be an unbelievable amount of panic. And then a horrific, violent thought. And it was just constant over and over and over again. And it doesn't last days or weeks. At least for me, it lasted for a year, very seriously. Combined with all the physical effects, my body was completely falling apart. I developed an autoimmune disease from the physical stress. And I stopped sleeping. Everything just fell apart. The whole system was like, oh, we can't work anymore because we don't know how.
So how did you begin to cope with all of these withdrawal symptoms? What practices did you put in place for yourself?
I had the benefit of ignorance, and I struggle with that in my advocacy work because there really was an angle of this where, because I didn't really know what was happening or how long it could last or how bad it could be, I just thought I could handle anything. And so now it's shit. I don't even know. On the one hand, we really need informed consent. And we really need people to understand that if what's happening to me happens to them, that it's not because they're mentally ill or crazy. It's because a drug they were told was safe was pulled away from them too quickly. So we need to know that. On the other hand, you become very highly suggestible in withdrawal. Your system is, it's like you become the ultimate manifester in withdrawal. If you want to manifest an illness or pain in withdrawal, you can do it in an instant. And if you are aware of all the things that could happen, I see people manifest worse withdrawal symptoms for themselves all the time in withdrawal because they're aware of it. So that ignorance really helped me in a way, but I did get to a point where it was so bad and it was so much worse than the depression had ever been, ever, that I became open to anything and anyone who had even an ounce of thinking that they could help me. And I started working with this kind of unconventional counselor. He blended Eastern and Western modalities
A
together.
shaman?
It wasn't a shaman.
No?
No, there was no plant medicine or anything like that involved. We only worked over the phone. Are you familiar with inner family systems? It's a therapeutic modality that like integrates different parts of yourself. That is the most apt comparison to this modality. What I used is called compassion key, but it allowed me to start working through the more, call it metaphorical or ephemeral or not grounded experiences I was having in withdrawal, because I'd have these violent thoughts or I'd see these visions in my mind eye and they didn't make any sense and I couldn't figure out what to do with them. And I wasn't safe going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because if you go to them and you say, hey, I'm having these horrible thoughts about hurting myself or other people, they're just going to throw you on an involuntary psychiatric hold and put you on even more drugs. So I knew that wasn't a safe space, but I had to figure out a way to talk about what I was experiencing, get it out, and make sense of it. This particular modality allowed me to do that because it wasn't about just like going back through time and asking me what my relationship was with my mother. It was about what's coming up for you today. And I felt safe with the person I was working with to be able to say, I see this emaciated, starving woman wandering through the desert in the year 500 BC. And he'd be like, okay, we're going to work with that. And that really helped me. And it also was part of the big foray into a more spiritual existence, because I didn't have explanations for why that mental image was coming into my head. And that sort of really broke me open from a spiritual perspective. And I started just going down that path a little bit more because it made me feel like I wasn't as crazy. I think I was so angry that the medical system had done this to me that I wasn't willing to go back into a framework that's drew a bullseye around my symptoms and said, here's what the DSM says about it. I felt so much more human in withdrawal in the most painful way. And I was also having these teeny tiny little moments of breakthrough or joy or really seeing the color of a flower or whatever it was, where I said, okay, if I'm able to go this dark, I'm also able to go into the light. And if I get these little moments, they were like little handholds for me. And so I said, I just need to start stringing together these little handholds. So there was something in me that truly believed that if my brain and body was capable of experiencing the beauty of looking at a flower for even 1 second, then one day it meant I wasn't permanently broken. I could do it for 2 seconds, and then eventually 3 and 4, and then a minute and an hour, and then a week. And I remember about maybe 3-4 months into withdrawal, because I was not yet out of New York, so it was probably 3-4 months. I was just at home, and I had trouble watching TV a lot of the time because it was too loud and the visual stimulus was too much. So the only TV I could watch when I was up for it would be comforting shows that I could predict. Like there couldn't be anything unexpected that would come in, because even that could send me into a withdrawal wave. So I was just watching Friends, and I'd watched it a million times before, and some joke was made that I'd heard a million times before, but it was like for the first time in 10 years I got it. And I just remember laughing. And then I had this moment where I was like, holy shit, not only have I been watching this show for 15 minutes and not felt like I was being put through a torture chamber, but also I'm laughing like a genuine laugh. And that was such a big moment for me, because I realized, oh, it's been 15 minutes. Okay, so we can keep doing this. I just didn't know how long it was going to take to build that 15 minutes into a life.
And is that where you figured out that happiness is a skill?
Yeah, it is a skill. We're certainly not taught how to do it. I don't think at that point I was really ready to understand that it was a skill. That took a little bit longer. My nervous system really had to calm down and I had to get some tools, but then it became a practice. It became a practice. Hey, Bella. Puppies are involved in that.
Yeah. What kind do you have?
She's a little former California street dog. She's part Chihuahua and
Nice.
Part Cretan hound.
Nice. My German Shepherd's being quiet today, so that's good. It's her birthday. She's 8.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah. So when we start talking about nervous system work, what did that look like for you? What were some of the practical skills that you learned to be able to navigate that?
I didn't even have the language for this stuff. It's
Well,
so
none of
interesting.
us do, and that's the whole thing.
I don't know. I think that is so much more common, even the way the Instagram algorithm has changed. And at the time when I was going through this, there was no video on Instagram. There's no
No.
carousels. It was just people's breakfasts. And so I didn't have something popping up suggesting to me like, hey, you can do a nervous system reset. And now when I work with people in the withdrawal, they tell me all this stuff. And it's just, God, there's so much information out there that's overwhelming in itself. But for me, I was just following this very blind little compass within me towards what felt easy. And by easy, I don't mean like path of least resistance. It was like that there was no energetic block around it. I didn't feel constricted when I thought about doing something, or I felt curious and it just felt open and like natural to take the next step. So I did that form of therapy for about a year really intensely, and then I moved to Vancouver, Canada. That move was really important. I needed to get out of the hustle and bustle of New York City, which is not exactly a place to reset your nervous system, into a place that had a lot more nature and calm. Vancouver had both the mountains and the water. And in that experience, I started to write my book, and I became drawn to the world of, again, this was 2018, so this was before all this stuff became trendy, but I got connected to the XPT organization, which is led by Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese, and they were doing breath work and cold plunging and sauna work well before everyone was talking about it. I became one of their coaches. They only did that for a short period of time, and it was this introduction into the world of, oh, breathing can really change your physiological state. And that helped me a lot. I did a lot of breathing stuff. I had to learn to move slow. I'd spent my whole life working at a high level in intense environments, whether or not that was in ballet or the kitchen. And I remember I was working with this really wonderful breathwork expert named Christina, and we were just working together. And you're not allowed to get your heart rate up. It was like, what? She's like, yeah, you're not allowed to get your heart rate up for 2 or 3 months. You got to stop doing CrossFit, stop lifting really heavy weights. You're going to go to
No.
yoga. You're going to take walks. And I fought her. I just couldn't get it. But finally, I just acquiesced and said, all right, fine, I'll give this a shot. And what I didn't realize is that I just didn't know how to live in a more parasympathetic state at all. And the only way to figure that out is to live there and to listen to what smarter people than you say sometimes, and go to a yoga class and intentionally breathe my way through it instead of trying to clean and jerk a bunch of weight. So I had to learn to live on that side of the spectrum and slow down. And it was a long process. That was most of 2018 for me. I do think that probably moved the needle in a way I didn't really realize it was moving at the time, but I came out of that year feeling like withdrawal was really finally behind me, and that there was much more balance in the way I was living my life. And then we just went from there.
How did you know you had a book in you?
I've always been a writer. It stopped from 15 to 30 when I was medicated. It cut off, but it always just felt very natural to me. I didn't really read much when I was medicated either, but as soon as I stopped, it was just insane what happened. Like, you stop taking these drugs and all of a sudden my creativity came rushing back. I wanted to read. I just didn't want to even watch the same TV shows or entertainment. What I wanted to do so wildly changed. And I had already published one book as part of my bakery, but it was a cookbook. So I was familiar with the process. And my literary agent, I was having a conversation with her in 2017, so about a year after getting off the drugs. And she just said, would you want to write a book about any of this stuff? I could try and sell it. And it was pretty low-hanging ask. And I didn't have anything else going on at the time. I just sold my bakery. And I said, okay, let me give it a shot. And I started just trying to writing stuff, put together this pretty horrible manuscript. And I was not really sure it was going to go anywhere. I had had one editor encourage me and say that the writing was strong enough to keep going, even though the manuscript itself was a mess. But what really changed the game for me was an article that came out in the New York Times in April of 2018. It was called Many People Taking Antidepressants Discover They Cannot Quit. It was written by Benedict Carey, who was an amazing science reporter, and I miss his work because the quality has gone downhill since he left. But it was this long expose on people not being able to get off their psych drugs and specifically their antidepressants. And when I saw that, I suddenly realized that my experience was not rare. I thought that I was just really one of these unlucky people in a very, again, at the small end of the bell curve. That's what I thought. So I figured that I just drew the short stick and that was it. This article made me realize, oh, I'm in the middle of the bell curve. This is actually probably the norm and people just don't realize it. And someone's going to write a book about this. May as well be me. And I didn't realize that mental commitment would take another 4 years, but it did.
No, I like that. It's often a question that I think a lot of people ask themselves, if somebody's going to do it, why not me? And again, I love that you take that forward step into uncertainty and you're just like, yeah, I'll do it. It took 4 more years. So what? But you
Yeah.
put your mind to something, you accomplish the task, and there's a lot of growth in that time period as you're going through and you're laying those chapters down and you're putting in the effort and you're doing the research and you're educating yourself beyond what you had prior on all of this stuff. And I've seen you on other podcasts, and it's just you're so well versed on the topic itself. And each podcast that I've seen you on is so engaging. So
Oh,
I
thanks.
can't thank you enough for spending time with us today and sharing your experience. What do you want people, maybe they've never seen you before, they've never heard of the book. What do you want people to get from the book if there's one single thing?
There's one single thing from the book. The book ultimately is a message of hope. I really wrote it in a way that would give words to the experience of withdrawal that could help either someone who's in it or a clinician who is just needs to get better at recognizing it because it can be difficult to recognize withdrawal, or a family member who's supporting someone going through it. I wrote it in a way that gets you as close to the experience without having going through it. But it ends and we get through to the point where we're going to get better, right? Like most people do recover from withdrawal. You hear some horror stories that where people are in it for years, but most people do recover. And even the people who are in it for years do start to recover. It's just there's no support around it. There's no conversation around it. There's so much crappy interpretation. And like I said earlier about people crisscrossing the reasons you go on and stay on a drug versus the reasons why you go on and how you come off of them. They're not the same conversation. They only belong to each other in the sense that you should be having a conversation about how to get off when you get put on. But any mental health advocacy work needs to include the reality that withdrawal from any psych drug is a very real, potentially dangerous situation. The fact that we cannot have that conversation without people feeling like you're freaking threatening their drugs is insane to me because it's not. Let's use alcohol as an example or peanuts or something, right? Yeah, there are people who are really allergic to peanuts, and we make it very clear that if you eat a peanut, you might die. And we don't let people have peanuts on planes or in schools, right? We haven't banned peanuts, but we've made it very aware that this can be a very dangerous thing for people. And the fact that we can't do that with psych drugs is baffling to me because it's a very common thing. So
Yes.
that's what I hope the book does. It just brings more awareness to this. And I know sometimes it scares people a little bit, and there's a little bit of strategic scaring, I guess. People should be rightly afraid of this. It should be part of the conversation when you get on them, because I haven't met anyone who's gone through with serious withdrawal who said that it was worth it. They've said it's worth it to get off of them, but I mean that the time they spent on the drugs was worth it compared to the pain of getting off of it. Most people just wish they had dealt with their issues at the time.
That's awful. It's very frustrating to hear these types of stories because we put our trust in these professionals to help us navigate some of our life's biggest challenges. And it seems as though, like I said, it seems as though it's really easy to just You have this is the medication, go ahead and put you on that, and then that's your life for however long until you realize that maybe it shouldn't be. Thank you so much for being here today. Tell everybody how they can find your book, May Cause Side Effects, and catch some of your culinary work as well.
May Cause Side Effects is available wherever books are sold. It's on audiobook too. And that's most of my social media and public presence is around the advocacy work. So I'm all over the internet at Brooke Siem, BrookesIem. I honestly don't talk too much about my culinary work. I was on an episode of Chopped. You can find that on HBO Max, season 32, episode 6. And most of my work is with private clients and pro athletes, so I just don't speak too much about it.
Yeah.
I would love to do more research at the intersection of psychiatric drug withdrawal and nutrition. But as of right now, that is a wildly unexplored area. So I have theories, but there's nothing substantiated because there's been no research on that. So I don't know, maybe one day.
Yeah, it's so interesting because people are very keen on dismissing the anecdotal stories of just life in general. You have to pay attention a little bit more and hone in on your discernment and begin to create that self-trust or cultivate it again, that it's okay to question things. Healthy skepticism is okay.
Yeah.
You should be questioning everything around you. And the professionals, they should be able to answer your questions.
Yeah, hell, question me, right? People.
Yeah.
I had someone come up to me the other day and say, I agree with 60% of what you said,
Okay.
of what you say. And I'm like, all right, great. But that 60% probably matters. That's going to shift your perspective and your approach to your life. So
then the question becomes, okay, so 60%, great. What are you going to do with that information now?
Yeah.
Like, you made the statement, that's great. Are you going to do any type of advocacy work? Are you doing anything on your end of the spectrum, or did you just have to like type that comment to make yourself feel good?
I was someone in person, but
it's always interesting to me.
Yeah.
I did have one more question. When you had those mind-eye hallucinations, have you painted any of those?
Yes, I have actually. That's most of not my work is I haven't shared a lot of the mind-eye hallucination work because it's really tough.
Well, yeah, it'd be a little trippy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure Instagram will love it, but
I think you'd
I
be
have
surprised.
I don't know. I have some data. Like when I share, so I'm working on I've gotten a couple grants to work on a series right now, and I am effectively painting the healing process, which sounds trite and hokey, but it's very cohesive and it's bright and it's colorful and I really love the way it's coming out. But then I've also started just getting the itch to paint some of those mind's eye experiences because I just wanted them out of me. Getting it in the book wasn't enough. And I painted a couple of them so far. And what I realized, and this is the beauty of art, right? Your brain often knows what, or your mind or your soul, whatever it is, knows what you're doing before you realize it. And I realized that I'm painting a companion piece to these other 9 pieces. So I've got this smaller, darker one that is where we started. And then I have these much bigger, brighter, more complete whole experiences. And it's the light and dark. It's the 2 sides of the same coin. It's the spectrum, whatever you want to call it. And so
the duality.
Yeah, it's the duality. So my plan is to create a companion piece for each of them. And then whenever we get to the point where we show them, they need to all be shown together. But they're very different styles. I posted one on my Instagram. This other one, though, I haven't put up because might be a little much.
I think it's awesome. You're a really great painter. The creativity really just seems to flow through you. Hopefully that continues on and you create more beautiful work.
Thanks. If I had it my way, I would paint as my main job and
Really?
my side gigs. Yeah.
Nice. There's nothing saying that you can't.
Just what's harder than creating and writing a successful book is making a career as a painter.
You never know.
You never know. We'll see. I'm going to see where this project or this collection goes. But yeah.